Welcome back to the Relationship Toolbox, a show about building positive relationships with others. On our previous shows, we've covered some of the skills listed here, and we're going to review some of those at this point. The first one was point of view and respecting the point of view of other people, even though that may be difficult. Excuse me. Restating what we have heard with it, which is basically using their words to say back, this is what I've heard from you. Reframing, which is used when someone is actually attacking you with words and you need to reframe those. Being curious, when someone's point of view is very different from your own and you don't want to just come back and rebut it, so you act curious and ask questions about it. Or validating, and that's when you begin to respond to the person with respect for having expressed his or her point of view to you. So we found that some of our viewers from the last time expressed some confusion about the difference between reframing and restating. So we thought we'd start out today with some clarification of those two. And then also, we're going to take another skill out of our toolbox and introduce it today called the I message.
So since we're backtracking just a little bit, we thought that we would put out there the restating piece. So if we're restating, you're basically repeating back to someone what you think you heard in your own words. You could even use the same words that they're saying. So that might look something like this. If I'm saying to Marsha, I'm going to say something and she's going to restate it to me. I was so angry when my boss saw me on my cell phone at work, and he yelled at me, and he wasn't even taking the time to bother to see if I was on a business call or a personal call or anything.
So you're angry that your boss assumed you were using it for personal when you were on your cell phone. And he had no right to yell at you because in fact you were using it for a business call.
Exactly.
Oh,
yes.
gosh.
So frustrating.
Yeah.
Right. So I know from what Marsha just said back to me, even though it wasn't verbatim what I said, I know that she understood what I was saying. Another example, might be something like if I say to Marsha, I'm so annoyed with you for taking my phone and reading all my emails. You didn't have any right to do that.
Okay, so you're angry with me because I took your phone and I read your emails, and you believe that I had no right to do that.
Exactly. Yes. So that was a little closer to what I had said verbatim, but it still works, and it still makes me understand that Marsha is hearing what I'm saying correctly. So those are important pieces. And restating doesn't solve problems, but it does set the stage for a continued respectful communication so that we can move forward with our conversation and discuss the concern that we are concerned about.
For instance, that conversation could be between a parent and a child, and the child could be perceiving that the parent had overstepped his or her boundaries, but the parent may think, for safety reasons, I need to know what you're up to.
Right.
There was understanding, and they could continue to have a conversation, even though they're far from resolving it.
Right, because those examples in and of themselves are not necessarily going to solve a whole problem. They're just the stepping stone to getting there.
And could I just add, there's also seems to be something almost therapeutic about feeling heard.
Definitely, absolutely.
And you can stop fighting.
Yes.
And get on with the process of resolving the problem.
And having a conversation.
Yeah. So the difference between restating and reframing is that reframing might be needed when a listener feels attacked. And the conversation may include things like, you never, or conversely, you always, or can you never do anything right? Or how can you be so stupid? Or do you ever think before you act? You're so selfish. Or you're so controlling, or you're so inconsiderate. I should have known I couldn't have trusted you. You're just like your father, or you're just like your mother. Don't lie to me because I know what you're intending to do. So these are cases where there's prickly, accusatory, judgmental, assumptions, attacks, And the listener has to remove those and either replace them with positive language or neutral language and just listen to the rest of the substance.
Which is very difficult to do.
Very difficult to do. Really difficult
While
to
you're
do.
feeling all those feelings.
Yeah.
Yes.
It takes practice, and you can't always sustain it, but you can fall back to that.
Right, and it's worth a shot. So an example of reframing might be something along the lines of, if I'm a boss and Tom is my employee and I'm speaking to him and Tom was late for work, I might go into Tom and say, Tom, you're late for work again. Have you ever been to work on time this entire year? What do you think the other employees think when they see you arriving late every single day? This is totally unacceptable and you need to be more responsible. So Tom might respond with something like,
It's true that I have been late on several occasions, and I do need to follow up and follow the same rules as all the other employees. I will be on time from now on.
so if you pay attention to what Tom did, he took all of the bait words out of the sentences that I used, and he took the attack and the sting out of it and said it back to me how he understood it without all of that information in there. So bait words in what I was saying are things along the lines of, late for work again. This is totally unacceptable. You're arriving late every day. Those are pieces that you want to take out and still be able to reframe it in such a way that it's understood.
So another example might be, again, a child, teenager to a parent, and teenager might say, you are such a hypocrite. You say that you trust me, but all you want to do is control me, and you never want to give me any freedom. You assume that the worst is always going to happen. All my friends' parents are going to let us. I don't know why you can't. I hate you.
Right now, you are very angry with me for setting limits on your freedom which you believe are unfair and more strict than your friends' parents. You want me to trust you to handle this situation.
Okay, so Tom didn't respond to the "you're a hypocrite," which was name calling. He didn't respond to "I hate you," which is the last thing the parent ever wants to hear, and to the comparison of other people. But he did validate as the teenagers, need to be trusted and the desire to have more freedom. So that might be a good place to start a conversation, because I did feel heard. And if he had chosen to take the bait, we might have just been trading insults, which is easy to do because it's hard to restrain yourself from that.
And even in a role play, I can respond with a somewhat neutral tone of voice. In reality, that would be very difficult to do that. But the more I can do that, the emphasis then goes on the points that you just made that I've heard, rather than, I've irritated my father now, that type of thing.
And
sometimes people throw that bait out because they want to provoke you to listen.
That's true too.
And
you want to practice taking those words out of it, and you want to practice taking the sting out of it and looking at the statements as looking for their concerns, not for the bait words.
Yes.
So, and
Because ultimately you want to
It's hard.
solve it. They want
Right.
to solve it, you want to solve it.
Right.
And sometimes people amplify with their sting and their accusations
Right.
just to get you to pay attention.
Right.
And that's
So-
one good distinction between restating and reframing. If you were to restate that, the sting words are being repeated, which would fire up the feelings all over
So you
again.
think I'm a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Right.
You hate me. Yeah.
So
And
now
that would-
you remove those, and you're still getting the gist of the message.
Right.
So that's an important distinction between reframing and restating.
Yes. So now we want to talk about the I message that Tom put up on our board from our toolbox. And it's another method for responding to an attack. And it's called the I message, as I said. And it forces the speaker to take ownership of his or her feelings and concerns, and instead of blaming other people for what they're feeling. Which, if we think about that, it's very common, right, that people put their thoughts and feelings on other people, and they feel that way because so-and-so did this. So the I statement helps you stay focused on yourself. I messages require the speaker to break down the communication into your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It also can be used whenever you need to express a point of view to another person that might be difficult for them to hear, because we don't always say things that people want to hear us say. And iMessages also avoid attacks on the other person. And so that in turn avoids a defensive reaction, because we're not looking for a defensive reaction. That doesn't get us anywhere. We want the person to respond in kind without defense. So Tom's going to go over some instructions about that.
There are 5 steps to an iMessage. The first one is to say the person's name. Now you may wonder, why in the world would I say the person's name? Because they obviously know their name. But by doing this, you are setting the tone for the things that are going to follow. So if the person's name is, say, George, and I say, George, I might as well forget everything else that's going to come after that in an iMessage, because I've now expressed irritation and anger, and that's what the person is going to react to. So I have to watch when I say the person's name, that I do it in a neutral way that gets their attention but does not create an emotional response of defensiveness. The second step is to use the word or introduce through the word when. So when I say, Bob, is that the word? I was using?
George.
George, sorry. Okay. I'll stick with George. So George, when you tell my wife about my new raise, I am describing what occurred, but I'm not calling him names. I'm not saying, what the heck is the matter with you? You did this. I'm not doing that. I'm just describing what happened. So the when part is very descriptive. The next part is to insert the emotion that I feel. So again, what was it?
George.
George, thank you. George, when you told my wife about my raise, I felt violated because I shared that with you in confidence. So I just did the next step too. I feel, and then because. And the last part is a request, not a demand, not a threat, but a request. So it goes something like this. I wish the next time you would keep the confidence and not share things with others that I have shared with you. So those 5 steps, the name, when, I feel, because, and the request, are the parts of the iMessage. It seems fairly simple, and yet there are many skills involved in those 5 steps.
And the request I just want to add in is always really hard to remember sometimes. So you get through all of it and you think, oh, I did a great job. And I got through, my tone was right and everything was great. And then,
Said what I wanted to say.
Right, and then I forgot completely to ask for what I wanted.
Well, let's try a couple of other examples.
And did I mention, I'm not sure I mentioned that when you do the request, it's important to request what you do want.
Yes.
Rather
Not
than
what you don't want.
Yes.
So if you say, I want you to
focus
stop
on
doing,
Right.
you're leaving the person with a vacuum of what you want.
Yes.
So I wish you would, or would you please do these things? Then it lets them know what your expectation is.
Which sometimes is hard to even figure out for yourself.
Exactly.
What you actually want from them.
And that's
So-
one of the nice skills of the iMessage. It
Right.
puts it on the proactive.
Yes.
You're so eager to get rid of the negative behavior, sometimes
Right.
you forget what
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah.
let's try a few other scenarios.
Okay.
So for instance, parent, teenager, or an older child who's transitioning into a different role might still be kind of feeling entitled but not so responsible. Maybe this child is sloppy, leaving laundry, eating and leaving a mess in the sink and not picking up after himself or herself. You know, the parent is thinking, oh, what am I going to do? I can't believe I'm being treated this way. Or they could get, snarky and snarly, or
vent.
or just angry and name calling, again, with the things that would have to be reframed. Or you could try an iMessage, and what would it sound like?
It might sound like this. Jake, when I find your dirty dishes left in the sink, I feel used and annoyed because this makes additional work for me, and I would like you to clean up your own dirty dishes.
All right, so matter of fact, it doesn't take the love out of the relationship, identify the problem, and ask for the request of what might be good. Let's try another. How about friendship? 2 friends are trying to make plans for a trip, and one friend is eager and making suggestions of flights and hotels and activities, and the other friend just isn't kind of closing that loop and making it happen. Could be frustrating. You're thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't take this trip. Maybe that my friend doesn't care. Well, what's wrong with her? Or we're going to lose a deal because they're evaporating while she's taking or he's taking so long. What might you be able to say instead as an iMessage?
Mary, when I ask you to look over the trip plans I am organizing for us and I get no response from you, I get frustrated because I can't confirm hotel reservations and take advantage of discount offers without your consent. I need you to respond to the information I am sharing with you much quicker so we can book reservations and take advantage of the discounts.
So hopefully they can get that conversation out before they go on the trip and they can still have a good time.
Could I add too that you notice that those of you who are viewing this that we're reading these, and I wanted to acknowledge the fact that these are difficult to do. And so we often will have to sit down and write out a good iMessage that we can deliver later on.
And practice it.
And
we
practice
practice,
it, yes.
Practice
right.
it.
Yes.
Eventually it can become easier, or you could at least get started and think about it in the moment. But it is hard.
And
like
taking
any
your
other.
time to think through is really
stages.
important also.
And to eliminate the parts that are not going to be constructive or
Right.
that really don't have to do about your feelings, but might be creeping in about what the other person should
And
do.
And you
stopping
can del-
yourself from doing that is tricky.
You can delay an iMessage too. I mean, you may react to something and just not say anything and then say, I'm going to come up with an iMessage for that one, and then later give it to somebody through the, your feelings that way.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be immediate.
Right. Yeah.
iMessages are particularly helpful when there's an imbalance of power. For instance, in a boss and employee situation. As an employee, it might be really frightening to express your needs, and you could use the iMessage as a framework for saying it. As a boss, it might be easy to overstep your authority and be a little heavy-handed if you don't. So let's say that a boss is not happy with performance, not hearing back from an employee in a timely way, really is getting frustrated. And if you want to take the anger and the judgment out of it and just the iMessage, what might it sound like?
George, when I send out an email to our project team and I hear nothing back from you, I feel irritated because I have to hold up the entire project until I hear from you. I need you to respond to my emails within 24 hours.
Okay. Staying in the workplace now could be that there's some conflict between employees, coworkers. Whew, that's tricky because you don't want to be a doormat, you don't want to be a martyr, but you also want to preserve the relationship because you have to work with this person. But let's say that somebody has taken your idea for their own. That's pretty important to remedy.
That can get the feelings
Yeah,
going.
Absolutely.
and you may indirectly want to talk to other colleagues about it and complain, but that's not going to solve the problem.
Right,
Right.
So ultimately,
It
you've
might
got to
escalate the problem.
It might,
Yes.
and talking around. So you got to go to the person with whom you have the grievance, and it might sound like,
Harry, at our last meeting with our boss, when I listened to you take credit for creating the software program to reduce the shipping time, I was furious and felt betrayed. I was the one to come up with the solution to the problem. I want you to set this straight with our boss so I can get credit for my own work.
so again, you don't have to take the feeling out of it, but you didn't name call, you didn't judge, you just say, this is how I felt. How could the person push back? That's one of the things I like about iMessage. You can't refute it.
It's very difficult. It's almost
No.
impossible.
This is,
Right,
when this
this is how
happened,
I
this is
feel.
what I feel. And it's
Right.
like, how can you say that's not what you feel? Because that is what I feel.
Right.
Let's try one more. This happens sometimes with co-parents who may have loose agreements about how to spend time. A holiday comes up or a vacation, and one parent has a really exciting thing to do. They dangle it in front of the child, and they've made plans before they talk to the other parent. So the other parent is feeling angry. This may be a habitual thing. He or she could choose to bash that other parent in front of the child, which is not ever a good idea, but sometimes a strong thing to restrain from. Could just swallow it, could get angry, or could hang it on the skeleton of an iMessage. What would it sound like?
Betty, when you make plans with our son during his vacation break, without checking with me, I feel cheated and manipulated because I too want to spend time with our son. I wish you would check in with me before making plans or introducing them to him.
Okay, so you got heard, didn't have to name call, didn't have to say that the person was a lousy person, a bad parent, a horrible human being because you were angry and hurt and betrayed and feeling competitive, but you got to say your piece.
And again, we just want to restate that we understand that these are not easy, number one, that these also are rehearsed a little bit here, and so it's practiced and we're reading from them, so we make sure that we get them correctly. At the same time, you might run into some sticking points when you're doing things like this. Like maybe one of the people, the person receiving the iMessage is going to make fun of you and mock what you're saying. And maybe they are going to indicate that they don't care, and maybe they don't. So that's a possibility. So that might look something like this. Some of the things you want to try to do is repeat your request over and over again so that they can't kind of get the best of you. So that repeating that request might look something like this.
So we'll go back to the iMessage I gave in the last one.
Yep.
I wish you would check with me before making plans with our son so that in case I also wanted to make some plans with him.
Oh, sure, okay. That means that we can never do anything fun. I can't do anything spontaneous. That's great. We'll just be dull, normal people, never do anything exciting because I gotta check in with you. Fine.
What I want you to hear is that I just wish that you would check with me.
So I'll
before.
just never make any fun plans. We'll just be the boring family. I just don't understand why you can't see how great an idea this was.
I would like it if you could just inform me of your plans and check with me before going ahead.
Fine, I'll check in with you.
Thank you.
And so one of the things that could happen if this doesn't go well and it just goes back and forth and it's not working, postpone it. There's not always a rush to come up with a final answer here. So just put the emotions on hold, put them aside for another time, and then you can address it later. One of the other things that people run into a lot is that they think that iMessages are just a way to change the word you to I. So instead of saying you do this and you do this, just saying, I, see this and I see that. But that's really, you're really doing a little bit more than just replacing those words. The main advantage is that the speaker is taking the ownership of his or her thoughts and feelings, rather than blaming or accusing the other person and causing the situation to escalate. So once you do that, and as Marsha was saying, if you're owning your own thoughts, your own feelings, that is, you can't refute that because they're what you're feeling and they're what you're thinking. So they also can be relatively easy to teach to children, which is great. So we don't teach enough of conflict resolution to our children, and then they grow up into an adult who they don't know how to resolve conflicts as adults. But these types of communications are really fairly easy to teach to children at a very young age. And if you start practicing them and modeling them, your kids will start practicing and modeling them. The other thing is, keep in mind, iMessages can be used to express gratitude and appreciation. So I might say something, to Tom and say, I really appreciated it when you checked in with me. It was really nice that you did that, and it made me feel really validated and understood. And I hope that you continue to do that because it was great. And sometimes we don't think to say things like that, but it's very helpful when you feel appreciated. So.
That might be a good place for people to practice. Start practicing with the positive iMessage. Because it's good to practice the framework, but it also establishes a nice climate.
Sure.
So that maybe later on when things aren't as easy, you have that basis. We would encourage you to think about something that you want to express to somebody that's important in your life, a need, a point of view, a perspective, and break down the components of the iMessage that Tom was explaining, their name and the when this happens, I feel because and I wish. You might have to write it down. You might have to practice it. Not only to kind of get the flow and to hear it for yourself, but also to make it authentic and not so stiff and stilted. But we encourage you to try that on. It's a great place to start.
It's a good point. It may feel very mechanical at first with it, but the more that you practice that and it becomes natural, the more effective it will become.
And as Tracy said, maybe postponing it. You're in the moment and you know you're supposed to do this, but you need to collect yourself, let your blood pressure go down, and think about it outside of the situation, and then you can come back with a wonderfully crafted iMessage.
And I love that. I'm sorry, I completely
sorry.
interrupted you.
Okay. No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I love what you said about being authentic. So make it authentically yours. So maybe you use some words that are synonymous with the words that we're saying, but make it authentically you, so it sounds natural.
This
more
happened,
natural.
this is what I felt, this is why, and I wish,
Exactly.
but you get the flow of it and the direction that you're taking, but it can be
Exactly.
your own words.
Exactly.
The iMessage also can be very flexible in a situation where you may have blown up at someone and realized afterward, whoa, that did not help at all. I wish I hadn't said that.
Right.
And then you can go back to the person and use the iMessage to correct it with it.
Yep.
So we're almost out of time, and I think we're going to go next time to maybe conflict
Yes.
styles or.
So we want to thank you again for watching another episode of the Relationship Toolbox. And we look forward to seeing you next time, where we will be discussing 6 ways of resolving conflict.